Hello and welcome to Property Matters, a weekly look at all matters property designed to be of interest to anyone who has an interest in property. And Property Matters is supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. Happy New Year to all of our viewers, wherever and whenever you're watching us. We were live last Sunday, 2nd of January, at the usual time with two special guests. So if you missed that, please go and find the show on either YouTube or Facebook. It's well worth a watch. So each week we focus, as you know by now, on the property stories of the week that are making the news. And we'd love you to get involved in the usual way by putting your comments in the comment section below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe the page so you get notifications of when we're live. And you can email us anytime you like, propertymatterstv@gmail.com. So it's Happy New Year once again to Mr. Joe Joshi. How's things settling down in the Joshi household and indeed in the business world of Mr. Joshi?
Yes, so welcome everybody and Happy New Year. 2022, of course, has got to be better than all the previous. We always wish and hope for that. Though I have to say it was a nice, chilled out, quiet one. And considering all of the lurgies and the pandemics and all sorts of things that I encountered I'm still here to annoy you as much as I can on a weekly basis. So that's the good news. And of course, a special thanks to our guests that we had last 2 weeks, having one from North Carolina and one from the local area, Bob Singh and Guy Charison, both learned people in their game, in their business, been a long time, and well worth the listen. Interesting things that even I picked up from some of the things that Bob was saying in terms of the financial and what you can do. So anyone looking for mortgage advice, financial services guidance, always keep in touch with us, and we can happily put you in touch with Bob in order to make sure that we try and pass on the right advice as we go on. And that's what Property Matters is all about, really, at the end of the day. It is about the property and the matters about property and everything that's related. And we'll continue to try and bring you all the best and the current news. And of course, Paul will no doubt bring his charts, graphs, and all the other bits that he likes to throw at me as a curveball. He's been testing me for a few years now, and I think I've done all right. But just let me know when you need to have a renewed body, Paul, because obviously, I know you want some more game in this, and you want somebody else to beat up and give them all your graphs and charts with,
I was just thinking we tried to get a guest from the North Pole, but we got one from North Carolina instead. Anyway, let's have a look at the first story. What better way to start a new year than to talk about tax? I mean, you can't get better than this, can you really? But in all seriousness, there are six property taxes that will be changing or might surprise you this year, particularly if you're a buy-to-let landlord. And we have accountancy firm H.W. Fisher to thank for this. They've outlined the main pitfalls to avoid in 2022. So we thought we'd share a few of those with everybody. HMRC are making a crackdown on capital gains tax this year. You will recall that we mentioned that up until the last budget, you had 30 days to pay any capital gains exposure from selling of the buy-to-let properties. But now you've got to pay it within 60 days. But they've given you a little bit extra because they just, people realise it was just far too short amount of time. So the government in the budget, the Chancellor in the budget said, OK, we'll make it 60 days. But now what they're saying is, well, OK, we're giving you 60 days, but that means there's going to be a zero tolerance to paying that. But there's still a lot of landlords out there, Joe, who don't know that they have only got 60 days, let alone the 30 days that was before that. And so many are getting caught. So it's going to be well worth talking to your accountant or taking the right advice to make sure that you get that paid quickly, because the penalties are fairly significant. So it's an important one to consider, isn't it, Joe?
Yes, absolutely. And, nothing like coming out of the running blocks with tax potentially. But I guess, they've been sort of sitting there thinking, well, we've had to pay out for the last few years, and now we've got to do a bit of collection work, and the tax collector is going to be knocking on the door. Yes, the 30 days to 60 days is good, and of course the other sort of tax rules and ideas that they're sort of murmuring in terms of buy-to-let properties and property in general. And it's not surprising, Paul, to be honest with you. I mean, considering the only investment or real investment that anybody ever seems to do is property, that's the only one that they're going to be able to knock on the door and say, "Look, can we have a bit more? Can we have a bit more, please? Please,
Mm,
sir, may I have some more?" Comes to my mind immediately there, and so I think, in terms of advice, I think it's very key. Um, I'm not a tax advisor, but we certainly need to bring on board a tax advisor into our show so that we make sure that the information that we're giving out to our viewers and listeners is current and up to date. And any questions, that I would probably suggest at this point that do bring your questions or write your questions in to Paul, and we will try and get somebody on board that is current and up to date to be able to make sure that we
mm,
are here to help you, guide you through the right steps of tax. Tax is important. It's important to the government, and equally it's important to us who pay it, because you don't want to overpay it, and you certainly don't want to underpay it on the basis that they'll only come back knocking on your door, and then there's charges. They'll charge you extra for delays and extras for this and that. So there's always extras in everything, really. So I think that is the key. But yes, there are several, and of course, as Paul's pointed out, there's I think 6 lined up, and we'll run through those
mm.
individually. But certainly, we will have the right people here to make sure that we're giving you the right guidance.
It does seem that there's some method in the madness from the Chancellor here, because obviously what he did was he created a boom year for everyone involved in property last year. Anyone transacting property had a really good year, and indeed, even if you just sat in the same house, your house appreciated significantly last year. I think the figure that I've seen today, £24,500 on average, is the amount that a house has gone up in 2021. So that's quite a nice achievement. So therefore, it's inevitable, I suppose, that the Chancellor's going to knock on the door when everyone's had a good year. He wants a piece of the pie. But looking at these taxes specifically, property developer tax, that's the one that was going to pay for all the cladding, if you remember. That's not going to affect many of our viewers, I wouldn't have thought, because that's only on profits of activities in excess of 25 million from April. And that's for accounting periods ending after the 31st of March. So that one, I think, is probably just there for awareness. But the interesting one, I think, the one that really wanted to focus on for this discussion, Joe, was about stamp duty land tax, as it's officially known. You need to keep an eye out for the changes to stamp duty that could be making mixed-use property more expensive. So at the moment, if you buy the classic high street property, the ground floor shop with the flat above, you only pay at the moment the commercial rate of stamp duty land tax. So HMRC are currently looking and proposing that the cost should be apportioned, so only the shop benefits from the commercial rate and the flat pays the higher residential rate. Now, we'll know what the decision on this is on the 22nd of February, but I didn't know that this was even under consultation. So it's interesting, isn't it, that they're looking to do that to the classic auction property, if you like, Joe, and that's going to make a significant difference to the cost of the property, I would suggest.
Yes, I mean, as you say, the classic. It's your commercial and uppers in terms of a bit of residential above the shop, and that's had a huge change in effect, Paul. To be honest with you, is with the pandemic that's happened over the last couple of years, the way we shop and the way we do shopping in the high street, and the high street in general, has now changed. The look. So many of these shops were closed or closing as more and more retailers or more companies went and did their business online. And so there was opportunity. So whilst the Chancellor is suggesting some of these changes, there are things that you obviously will probably have to take into consideration. That not all shops and uppers are all separate. They're not shops downstairs and residential upstairs. In some cases, they may have been commercially upstairs as well, maybe an office or some sort of workshop or whatever they've been doing. So don't be too alarmed about it. But yes, in the short term, the basic or the classic, as Paul says, is the shopper and upper, and that will have a differentiated tax branding or banding, as it may be. But do always check that, make sure that you are protected by the right usage and the right planning, and that will help you achieve the right tax that is due, the stamp duty tax or land stamp duty tax that will be payable. If you really look at it in the grand scheme, yes, it could be 5% in one part and 10 or 12% at the other, or whatever the level, or 2% separately, depending on the price and how they proportion it. It is about proportioning, and it's always going to be how somebody proportion it. Is the commercial aspect bigger in square footage than perhaps the upstairs? I mean, you might find that the average flat upstairs is probably, let's say, 1,000 square feet, but the shop may have been extended to 2,000 or 3,000 square feet downstairs. So it might be that the calculation will be done on square footage, and you may not be any worse off in the sense that the upstairs is quite small, though its calculation is done with perhaps a higher rate. But yeah, I mean, it's not in yet. It is in discussion, and it is likely to be recommended. But again, my view is that they are just looking to see how else they can actually reap the rewards of the fruits that we've all had over the last couple of years. The house prices going up generally, property prices generally going up, and of course the Treasury wants their piece of the pie.
Yeah, they've also ended the reduced VAT, or they will do this year, obviously, once these changes come in April. But the reduced VAT on holiday lets, that's gone. So that's increased from 5% as it used to be to 12.5%. And that's retrospective to last October. So that's all changing. And the VAT conversion of commercial to residential. So what happens with VAT when dwellings are converted from commercial to residential, which of course a lot of people will be doing now. They've got empty office blocks, they want to make them into residential. So the 5% rate of VAT applies to conversions of non-residential buildings into dwellings. It also applies to the conversion of a house to create additional dwellings, and the conversion of multiple occupancy dwellings, if I could say, into one house. And you can also apply it to the renovation of residential property which has been unoccupied for more than 2 years. So there are some ways to save on the VAT, particularly when you're doing commercial and residential. There's just a few of them. And you can get a 5% rate, for example, Joe, on working on the fabric of the building, so the walls, the roofs, the floors, the stairs, the windows, doors, wiring, plumbing, that kind of thing. And even the provision of facilities such as water, power, heat and drainage can also, and installation of fitted kitchens, for example, all get the 5% VAT treatment. So actually that's quite a good incentive in terms of moving from commercial to residential.
Yeah, it's interesting that and so many people are not even probably aware that there is a VAT or commercial VAT to be paid even if you're extending an existing property and so forth. I don't think anybody has probably ever bothered to really look at that, other than obviously the goods that they've bought, that they've actually been able to do that. Because when most people have their own home, they've not registered it as a limited company or VAT registered it, so that VAT just goes. It's gone into Bolivia for what it's called, and so they don't actually get a gain. But it'll be interesting to see how that can be clawed back, even if they're paying it on the extension side, which theoretically they shouldn't, because it's their main home. But it might be that if they had a house that was a buy-to-let under a commercial buy-to-let mortgage, then that would have the opportunity to extend, and when they extended it, they might be liable to pay VAT at a commercial rate. But yeah, I mean, all of these things that are coming with taxation, some of them are good in some ways because it kind of focuses you towards making sure that when you are doing the jobs that you do them right. But equally, I know most people would hate the idea of having to pay more in any form of tax. So the only thing I would suggest that you do is obviously when you are doing work on your property, you save the receipts and make sure that you can actually claim some of those costs and things back in the upkeep. A lot of people don't do it. I know that. No. They just think, oh yeah, well I'll just throw that away and that's not there. But these are claimable documents. If you've spent the money and you paid tax and VAT, you are obviously obliged and able to claim those. But we look at it and say, oh, it's only 25 pence or 30 pence or £1.50. You don't think of it that way, but as they always say, it's with small drops. You can have a whole pool, and here is the way to make sure that you cover all of your extras.
It is a minefield. For example, all of those things I mentioned there all have a 5% VAT applicable. But for example, it doesn't cover things like professional fees for the architects or the surveyors. So that's a full rate VAT item. So it really does need looking into. There's also, we won't go into the detail here now, but there's also various VAT and tax traps on the development of student accommodation. But I think that's pretty niche, and if you want to find out more, I suggest you go online and look it up. And obviously you can find that on Property Investor Eye, which is where we found the story for this one. Okay, let's move on to our second story of the week, and I do like this one because we have touched on this towards the end of the year, because there's been a pressure being put yet again on landlords to get those EPC certificates up to a C level, because they've got to get that done by 2026 for new tenancies and 2028 for existing tenancies. But of course, the same thing also applies to all of us, Joe, who own a property largely built before 1900, because obviously we've got some of the, and I didn't realise this, we've got some of the oldest housing stock in Europe. So we're going to be the most exposed to this. But basically, just like the landlords, we've got to get our properties up to scratch. Obviously, the government has committed to reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2050, which means pretty much that just about every home has to offset its pollution output, if you want to call it that, by that time. But and that might seem a long way away, but we're already just 6 years or 4 years away for new tenancies for landlords. So the time's going to go quickly. But the majority with properties built before 1900, so 79%, accept that they need to make changes to cut their carbon footprint. But 57% haven't got a clue what they need to do about it. And a fifth are completely unaware that they even need to adapt their properties at all. So this is just a huge problem waiting to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think my view on that is that, first of all, yes, it's a good thing for the property. It's a good thing for your purse strings as well, to try and contain as much as you can of the heating and the things that you pay for, which are just going straight throughout your roof or out your windows, etc. And I suppose I was thinking about this, prior to us doing this story online, and that is that, where do you start and how does that work? And I'm going to suggest a reversal role here, and that is that when and wherever you are looking to do something to your property, maybe the first thing to do is to start with an EPC and get somebody in to actually do the EPC and tell you what bits are actually bad and what bits are good and what bits need improving and what bits you can get away with. For example, within an EPC, you've got your windows, your doors, your shuts, your gaps, your insulation, your roof. All of those things are part of what they're going to be making suggestions on. It might be that some properties that are way too old to make any alterations to their brickwork or their sort of actual structure, there may be some internals, things that you could do. So it might be the type of and the quality of windows. And obviously in older properties, especially listed properties, it makes it even harder because English Heritage make an absolute dog's dinner of it, all this, because they will come along and say it has to be in old style, it has to be the same, the look, it has to be in in timber, it has to be this, it has to be that, because we want to maintain the historical look at it. But on the other side, they want also an EPC rating that is going to be reduced, and the two are not going to meet. So, and normally they then suggest things like, oh, well, you could have secondary glazing inside, which actually looks pretty rubbish from your inside of the property and doesn't always give you the results. So there's lots of things, but I think the way to do this would probably to start with an EPC. It's the same similar principle, as I say, that to someone who's about to go and get a new mortgage. My attitude there is to actually go and get yourself your own Experian test done first. Make sure that you've got your file on your credit history and understand where the problems might lie if you're going to go out looking for a mortgage or doing anything, because that will point out the problems and the issues that you've got and the things that you can improve and the things you can't improve. And I think EPC is probably a good way. I know it's another 50, 60, £100 you've got to pay, but sometimes it's the lesser of the two evils, isn't it? You can get that and then know that you haven't got to spend your money on perhaps a new roof, because that is okay with the current installation. But you might need to spend that money elsewhere in the building. Whereas without that sort of information, you might say, well, actually, all my heat is going out of the roof, and you know, I better go and put a new roof on it and do this. So okay, they're extreme points, but they are points that says that, you know, check it and then reverse back out of that, and hopefully we can help you achieve the goals that you are looking to achieve, and that is to reduce the carbon footprint, get a better EPC rating, because they'll come back and uprate it on the improvements that you've made, and hopefully everyone's a winner.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to consider in all of this because, for example, some of those older properties won't have cavity walls, for example. So there's going to be specific challenges to those types of properties. And obviously, as you say, Joe, you know, the walls and clearly the roof are and double glazing and sealed doors, that kind of thing, are all the initial places to look. But as you say, get the EPC assessment in and you'll know where to start. But there's another point that's just dawned on me. Because if you think about it, a lot of these older period properties are owned by older people. We were talking, weren't we, last time about the percentage of people that own their own home and the age group. And to put no finer point on it, Joe, we're sort of 25 years away almost from some of these properties needing to be compliant by 2050. There's going to be a generational change in the ownership of some of those properties. So there's going to be people coming to those properties with less time to do all this work if it's not done soonest.
Yes, and obviously there lies a problem, but also a solution. The problem is obviously these properties that are going to be within the next 25 years, the occupants in some cases will have changed. People's ideas would have changed, and upgrading and making sure the improvements will have to be done in line. So in a way, it's probably not a bad thing because that's how they're going to come into the force. I can also foresee that lenders will get a little bit cheeky on that as well. And they'll come in and say, yes, it's an older property, and we're going to hold back funds until you make X, Y, Z improvements. Back in the early days, it was notorious for a retention on a mortgage. People would turn around and say, you know, it needs a new bath, a new kitchen, or whatever it might need at the time. And the lender would just simply say, or the surveyor would recommend a retention of, say, £10,000 until the works were done. So all of a sudden, not only did you have to find £10,000 worth of funds to do the work, you also had to find £10,000 in your mortgage to make sure that the matter could complete, because the lender would only give you that £10,000 back once the work was done. So, you know, you're borrowing double money for that part of it. So there are ways to work around that. We used to do that, especially when there were vacant properties. You could exchange on something and probably get some sort of access in between exchange and completion. Maybe you get a slightly delayed completion and get the works done. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of changes in order to meet these. I can't see it happen in the timescale personally, for a number of reasons. And one of those is obviously the trades. You can't get the people who are doing these things. I was going to mention that. You know, workers are the skills that are required to do those are just lessening every single day. And even if you're getting a trades guy who says he knows what he's doing, you've got to be doubly cautious, because you know what, they can gild the lily, but underneath it might be not as good as you think it's been. So you've got to be really, really careful where you're spending your money and who you're spending it with. It's better to be cautious and take your time.
As it stands at the moment, homeowners said in their survey recently that they'd spend $5,500 as a maximum on upgrading their property, which I'm surprised it's that high, actually. The installation of heat pumps, however, with a gas boiler alternative costing between $10,000 and $18,000. So $5,500 isn't going to go very far when it costs you up to 18,000 to put a new heat pump in instead of having your current boiler. So there's a long way to go, and I think the general consensus is the government has a part to play in this, but also, interestingly, the specialist lenders, because there's a suggestion that specialist lenders could come in to help fund this. And one of them actually says he believes that this is the greatest challenge that we currently face in the property industry, is this challenge to get the homes up to scratch, even in the next 25 years. Like you say, I can't see them making the target, to be honest.
No, I can't see them making the target. And interestingly enough, this whole thing about being put on the government is also a far cry. The government's got not a great deal to do with how you maintain and keep your own properties. And their argument will be that, and even if you did get the money from them and you did get the upgrade from them and so forth, you're going to find that they actually turn around and say that it's not exactly down to us to do that. Why should we be doing that? So you've got to be pretty careful in terms of what you think the government should or shouldn't do. And even if they did do it, Paul, they're going to turn around and put it in taxation somewhere down the line. So it's only a short-lived program.
One thing I suppose we can hope for is that the technology becomes more mainstream, and therefore the price of the equipment and the installation goes down over the next decade or so. I guess that's about all we can really hope for at this stage, I would assume. Okay, let's have a quick look at our final story this week, and you'll like this one, Joe. We're very landlord focused this week, so just by not by intention, just by design. Most of the buy-to-let community view the term landlord as dated and would prefer the media to stop using the term. So landlords don't want to be called landlords anymore, Joe. 3 in 5 told a broker Mortgages for Business that they wanted the British media to stop using the word landlord. 43% preferring the term small housing providers, which is catchy, isn't it? Sections of the media have been vilifying the buy-to-let community, and if you think also the government's been hammering on with the 3% stamp duty surcharge and other tax deterrents, that was introduced by Theresa May, that one. And it's got to the point where the buy-to-let community doesn't want to be associated with the term landlord anymore. The term carries much more baggage than it once did, and the community wants a rebrand. Now, there is some portents for this, because the NBC network in America have banned the word from their vocabulary on the TV there. They don't use the word landlord when they refer to buy-to-let community now. So it's already happening in the States, and it always seems to happen there first before it happens anywhere else, I guess. But it's interesting, isn't it, that that perhaps the landlord is perhaps the new double glazing salesman of the 80s.
What a load of rubbish.
I knew you'd love this one.
I mean, have they got nothing better to do? These people, it's obviously, someone who's sitting there thinking, oh, well, let's go and ban the word landlord. And all of a sudden this is going to make news, and here we are talking about it. So obviously it's made some news, but it's a load of codswallop, as they would say. Well, only nice word that I can think about while I'm sitting on air here. Landlords are landlords, and they do what they do because that's what it says on the tin. And you can decorate it as many different ways as you like, but that's not going to take away the issues and the problems and the information and the details and all their commitments that they've got to do, whether you call them community of properties or, I don't know, recycled yuppies or something. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, but it's not going to make any difference. So whoever sat there and came up with this, and America is not an example for this. America discusses things. I mean, the country is so huge. They don't leave their own country in order to sort of go out. They just slip within the same. They just don't grow. So they can create whatever they like internally. But we are an island. We are the United Kingdom, and we're powerful in what we do. And we have landlords, and that's what they do. And it's grown as landlords, and that sector has grown because our country doesn't allow us to have any other sound investments other than to be a landlord. And everybody aspires to be a landlord. There's nothing wrong with being a landlord. Landlord in the old world was very gentry, wasn't it? One was a landlord of an estate or whatever. So why would they want to be a landlord? Sorry, a member of the community of some estate that they've owned, which is 500-600 acres and 3,000 years in their family or something. They want to be landowners. They want to be landlords. So whoever came up with it, I think they should just go back in that little box.
There is an interesting point in all of this, though, Joe, because if you think about it, the majority of landlords are paying 40% tax on their rental income, and they're paying stamp duty at a higher rate on the purchase of their properties, which means the government's making a huge profit out of generation rent. But they don't seem to be reinvesting it. I mean, they're hammering landlords over the last 5 years, and that's done first-time buyers no favours. New survey out this week says that now first-time buyers, Joe, you get this, need to save a huge 113% of their annual salary for a typical home deposit of 20%. So they've got to save more than they earn, let alone take the bills out and put some away after that. They've got to earn 13% more than they earn, or save 13% more than they earn, just to get to a 20% deposit. So without the landlords providing the rental properties, we'd be in a pretty terrible state, and the government doesn't seem to be pouring any money into social housing to take the responsibility away from the landlords. So the landlords perhaps quite rightly feel a bit aggrieved. I mean, 73% of them said that they feel unfairly portrayed as the generation's financial bogeyman. I mean, that's how feelings are running high. But there is a point there, isn't there? Because the government's been taxing those people, but they are providing, in the absence of anything else, and it's not a perfect world by any stretch, but they are providing a service to those that can't afford to buy.
I take on board quite a lot what you say, Paul, and I'm sympathetic to the landlords. I'm not saying that is the wrong or the right thing. I just think that first and foremost, to diminish a name that is existing is just rubbish. So I think that's just somebody who's there. In terms of the contribution, we forget. It's like anything. We always remember the bad news. Bad news always sells fastest than good news. The bad news is always that the government is taxing you left, right, and centre, and they're doing this and they're doing that. The good news is, and I'm not, supporting any particular government. I'm just looking at it as a layman. The good news is that when people have, buggered up during their journey, for example, cladding on buildings, and the builders and the developers that did those things, and I'm just using this as a pure example, made their profit and went, and yes, they might have paid their taxes, but guess who's holding that baby in their hand right now? Because everybody is onto the government to say that you've got to help us pay for this and put this cladding right, so that we can get on. So there is some good that they have to do, but unfortunately that is never seen as a good. They just think that that's their duty. They must do this because they're the government and we pay taxes. Well, we pay taxes on the profits and the gains that you make. So it's a vicious cycle, really. It's just that you don't remember the good things. So I can go back in the last year, 18 months, 2 years now, whatever we've been doing this show, it seems like forever, that basically look at the cladding issues. How many billions, and I'm just picking one subject, how many billions of pounds have the government had to put aside in order to deal with an issue that they didn't have a responsibility in? It was nothing to do with them, but in order to help the people, they've got to stand up and be counted. What happened to the insurance company? What happened to the developers that put those claddings on there? What about the manufacturers that put the substandard stuff in the first place? Where are they all gone? Nobody's there. So someone's had to pick up those pieces because the people that live in those properties aren't able to sell them or finance them or do anything until it's dealt with. So I think, I'm just trying to be a little bit fair that whilst there are things that don't happen, there are underlying things that do happen, and they happen because we've had to pay those taxes. So, but I've always said, if the government or anybody can come out with a scheme that allows for people to have some other investment, we wouldn't have all the pressure that there is on the property side of it. The only bad thing about that is that I'd be out of a job. So, I couldn't do this. every week, and I wouldn't be I wouldn't be selling those properties. But they should consider at a certain age. It's a bit like certain homes are available to people over the age of 60. By the way, I'm going to be qualifying for that next year. And you get your bus pass and you get all those other bits. And I think at a certain age, they should be able to offer an alternative investment for those instead of them actually taking on a flat and a leaky tap, which they don't really want to do.
Yeah, this is the thing, that because they're saying here 1 in 5 Britons has no form of private or workplace pension. So therefore, of course, what they're doing is they're swelling the ranks of the landlords by buying one, maybe two, couple of properties, getting that as a retirement income for themselves in the absence of any workplace or private pension or any savings. And there's no point putting it into building societies, we all know, because there's going to be no return on it. So they're putting it into property. And of course, in a way, that's probably getting landlords a bit of a bad name, because not all of these novice landlords will be good landlords because they won't be experienced.
But isn't that the case in pretty much everything we do? There's always going to be some people that are conscious about what they do and they do it consciously good. And there are others that are not going to be doing that. But it's always the ones that don't do it that get recognized. That's the ones that makes the story. And the guys that are doing an ethically good, humane, considerate job are probably the ones that are not going to get recognized. It's just human nature. But so, if you want to get recognized, become bad landlord. But if you don't want to go down that route, then be a good landlord. But landlords will survive.
I'm sure they will, and I'm sure that's a story that will run and run. Okay, so let's just finish up with the first property of the week for the new year from the auction property Rightmove page. We've got Bohemia Road in St Leonards, nice part of East Sussex, Joe.
Yeah, it's an interesting property, this, Paul. So Auction Property are delighted to offer this in their next auction on the 15th of February. Bidding starts at 9 o'clock. It's a 6 rooms is how Rightmove have allowed us to express it. Formerly, as you can see, it was probably a shop and upper. We covered that subject earlier on today, but currently it is operating as 2 flats. Over 4 floors. So there's a lower ground floor, basement, ground, first floor, and one at the top. The property has long-term tenants in the property, and they are on ASTs, but due to the pandemic and so forth, are not able to be moved out immediately. Our client has instructed us to sell this property in auction. I think the win on it is in the back. There's potential to put another a dwelling of some sort, be it a small bungalow or a small house at the back, where that garage is standing at the moment. And as you can see to the right of that picture, you will see that and also to the left, that there is a dwelling either side of it, which is much higher than the garage. So real scope to put something at the back and expand that portfolio. Guide price of £175,000. And of course, biddings will start from there or plus. And our aim is to achieve the best possible money for that. It's a good investment property, has a small income and scope for development. And I think it's very exciting. What are you going to get for £175,000? Who would like to start me off at £175,000?
It looks a bit like a rabbit warren, because from the front it doesn't look like it could possibly have all that space, but it really does. It goes back obviously and high up.
Yeah, like I said, if you look at the 2 buildings either side of it,
yeah,
there's scope at the back. Each one of them's down. There's a road there, but so Auction Property delighted to offer that, and obviously now taking instructions, looking for any new instructions that are coming on board. Throughout the UK, we'll sell anything. In fact, if you stand still long enough, Paul, I've got a bid for you.
Well, in that case, then I better run, because it's time for us to go. We've exceeded our time as always. Thank you so much for watching. Great to have you with us in 2022. We'll be back at the same time next week.